As a fellow Longhorn, your mornings are better with us. So start your day the Vivo way. Good morning, Longhorns. Wednesdays at 7 a.m. Central Time on TSTV. Tonight on Tower Talks, incumbent Texas Senator Ted Cruz debates Democratic challenger Colin Allred in Dallas, Texas. Record-breaking Hurricane Milton made landfall last week in Florida. A deep dive into the impact. The impact of climate change and green initiatives. An expert panel here to answer our questions. All of this coming up on Tower Talks. Good evening and welcome to Tower Talks, the show where we take a closer look at the stories affecting Texans, Austinites, and students right here at UT Austin. I'm Medha Sarin, and tonight we have an expert panel lined up for you to talk about climate change and green initiatives. But before we get into that, a lot is going on around the world and in politics. Senator Ted Cruz and Representative Colin Allred faced off in Dallas last night, where they met for their first and only debate in the candidates' race for Senate. The race has received national attention as polls have grown closer ahead of Election Day. While Cruz is still ahead in most polls, high-level Democrats are looking at the seat as one of the most likely paths to maintain control of the Senate, which appears likely to flip to Republican control. Last night's event touched on a variety of topics and policy disagreements between the two, including major issues for Texas voters like reproductive health care, immigration, and each candidate's records in Congress. Abortion was the first topic of the debate. Allred attacked Texas's restrictions on reproductive health care by highlighting personal stories of affected women. Cruz would not take a firm position on how he feels about reproductive rights, even when asked in follow-ups by moderators, instead insisting the decision should be made by each state legislature. On the border, Cruz attacked Allred for his voting record and shift in position, as Allred has taken stronger positions on immigration since campaigning for office. Allred highlighted the failed border bill that Cruz voted against in the Senate in May, tying Cruz's vote to an overall theme of inaction Allred would try to touch on throughout the night. The candidates also targeted each other on transgender rights in sports, January 6th, foreign policy, affordable housing, and more. Overall, the debate gave Allred and Cruz a chance to try and present themselves as moderate candidates while attacking the other's record. Allred worked to tie Cruz to former President Donald Trump, and Cruz attacked Allred for his work with Vice President Kamala Harris and the Biden administration. While the debate was lively and at times heated, its overall effect on the race is yet to be seen, though multiple commentators have speculated its impact will be minimal. Late last Wednesday, Hurricane Milton made landfall on Florida's west coast. While the hurricane primarily affected Sarasota County, tornadoes and floods were seen across the state. Experts have assessed that the total damage was not as severe as it could have been, although upwards of 2.2 million people lost power, and more than 24 deaths have been reported so far, according to sources of the New York Times. Milton emerged merely 2 weeks after Hurricane Helen hit the southeast coast of the United States. Beginning as a tropical storm, Milton became a Category 5 hurricane by October 7th, before weakening to Category 3, then 1, as it continued to move inland. According to CBS News, the storm hit Siesta Key, Florida, at around 9 p.m. Wednesday with wind speeds of 120 miles per hour and intense rainfall that resulted in major flooding across Florida. Experts at Miami's National Weather Service office observed the emergence of at least 4 tornadoes as a result of Hurricane Milton, adding to further destruction from the storm. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has begun working with state response and recovery efforts to begin rehabilitation post-Milton. According to his website, on October 15th, DeSantis allocated $9.5 million to Seaport Manatee, one of South Florida's deep water seaports. The investment is split into 3 parts: $5.5 million for emergency berth repairs in state waters, $3.5 million for emergent security needs, and $500,000 for planning efforts toward reconstruction. Coming up, we have an expert panel here to discuss climate change and green initiatives. Stay tuned.
13 of the 48 club sports offered by the university now require students to submit proof of sex assigned at birth.
I know deep down they would probably want to stay with the university.
No way in hell anybody's going to tell my daughters what to do with their bodies.
This state is one of the worst in child education.
We can't take it anymore, seeing those scenes.
Going to Hillel on Friday night, all my family members kept texting me not to go.
There's a huge housing crisis in Austin. Do you have a plan in place to address this issue?
Determined to start your day well? We're up bright and early. From the enriching local stories to the weather forecast later in the day. Rain or shine, at Good Morning Longhorns, we got you covered. Comprised of a studious reporting staff going lengths to get that scoop, and a talented technical team to enhance your screen visually. As a fellow Longhorn, your mornings are better with us. So start your day the Vivo way. Good Morning Longhorns, Wednesdays at 7 a.m. Central Time on TSTV.
13 of the 48 club sports offered by the university now require students to submit proof of sex assigned at birth.
I know deep down they would probably want to stay with the university.
No way in hell anybody's going to tell.
Welcome back to Tower Talks. Our expert climate change panel includes Misha Matz, professor at the Department of Integrative Biology, Judd Parton, research associate professor at the Institute for Geophysics at the Jackson School of Geosciences, Project Cressel postdoctoral fellow Helen Siegel, and finally Melinda Taylor, professor and former director of the Ecosystem Restoration Program of the Environmental Defense Fund. Thank you all for coming on the panel tonight. To start, climate science and climate change is a very massive, complex field of study. So I would like to start by hearing each of you explain your background and your research in climate change and what made you interested in studying climate change in the first place. So we can start with Misha and go down.
Okay, I'm a coral biologist, so I study coral reefs, and most, if not all, actually heard that coral reefs are suffering right now due to climate change. It's not because I started doing this, I was just interested in corals because it's a nice system and we are studying their adaptation at the genomic level, how they handle variable conditions across the range and through time now. And turns out it's very relevant what's happening because everybody wants to see whether they have any chance at all, and that's what we're trying to address in my lab.
My research is about studying past climate, so I use natural archives. A lot of times people are familiar with ice cores or tree rings. I use corals, which I didn't know. Misha studies corals. Corals and stalagmites inside of caves, as well as sediments in the ocean, to reconstruct climate was like before people were writing it down. And so then we know about what the natural cycles of climate are and what's going on. How I got into it was complete luck and happenstance. I'm a chemist by training, and then got just not happy with chemistry advanced degree. So I quit grad school, went to industry, found out industry wasn't for me, and then went back to school. So students out there who haven't figured things out, don't worry. I wasn't 25, 26 that I figured out what I wanted to do. So I started studying earth science, and I realized you can just go around the world and study the whole planet. And so now I've been in the field 20 times all across the planet and seeing the world and seeing the effects of climate change firsthand, as well as studying, what's going on and what we can expect.
That's exciting. And Helen, for you?
Yeah, so my background is in water resources and understanding how water quality and water availability really impact communities. And that's something that you can't really study nowadays without considering climate change. Even in some of the more traditional areas where you're not really thinking that there's going to be a huge climate impact, it's sort of a global issue. And so that's how I got into climate change research.
Yeah, so I'm a law professor, and my specialty is environmental law and energy law. When I first got out of law school many years ago, I practiced environmental law both in a private setting and then at an NGO, the Environmental Defense Fund, before I came to the university. And a couple of things. Over time, the environmental law has always been very siloed. So we have a Clean Water Act, we have a Clean Air Act, we have a Toxic Substance and Control Act, et cetera. And climate change is an issue that really is cross-cutting and affects all of the different environmental media. So particularly over the last decade or so, my research has moved in the direction of trying to understand what policies and legal regimes might be most effective at addressing climate change, both from a mitigation standpoint to reduce emissions, but also from an adaptation standpoint. How do we move forward in a green economy and do so in a way that protects the natural features that people care about, biodiversity, clean water, clean air, and all those things.
Okay, thank you all for that. It's interesting how you all come from slightly different research backgrounds, but climate change still kind of is the common link through all of this. I want to start with a question for you, Helen. As a Kressel postdoctoral fellow, you're studying how climate change affects marginalized groups. How have you seen climate change impact in Austin?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think one of the big things for historically disadvantaged groups or economically disadvantaged groups is that there's a lot less buffer. And so what we study is really community resilience and how do we develop strategies to increase that resilience, especially at the bottom. And one of the things that I think comes out again and again is just this lack of this available buffer. And so we work with a lot of communities in East Austin where they're already struggling financially for a lot of different reasons. And then you add in additional costs for water and the lack of extra water, and it just throws them over the edge financially. So it's just an extra stress that's sort of squeezing the bottom part of our population.
I should actually step back, and I want to start by getting a definition of climate change from you all before we go too far into this. So can one of you, or maybe you kind of working together, give us a definition of what climate change is? Does anyone want to pick it up?
Yeah, so I think one of the most important parts of a definition of climate change at this point is that it's not just a natural phenomenon, it's something that's really driven by anthropogenic or human-induced causes. And so it's something where the excess emissions of greenhouse gases that humans have produced since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution have really been the driving force for changing climate. And I think it's also important to note that climate change doesn't just include global warming anymore. And so it's not just this increase in temperature, it's also this increase in the intensity of storms, the intensity of droughts, as well as just, the change in the overall energy dynamics of the globe.
I used to say to my class that climate change is basically everything getting more and more out of whack. You can see how we get these freezes when there was never freezes like in Austin. We have hurricanes which are so devastating we never saw them before. We have emerging diseases, should I mention, both with humans and with natural populations. We have this sea level rise which is flooding Miami right now as we speak. And all that, basically the whole system gets out of balance. It's because of the disturbance to the energy cycle of the planet. It's not just warming.
That is that in addition to the change of the systems and the weather alterations that we're all observing, we shouldn't forget about the impacts of those things on ecosystems and on biodiversity. I mean, at this point, the largest cause or the most significant cause of biodiversity loss in the world is related to climate change, whether that's because of the introduction of species, exotic species that become predators for animals in areas where they historically couldn't have existed, but now they can because those places are warmer, to ocean acidification and warming, to whatever. But you see it, we're all suffering from it as humans, but it's also very much affecting our natural ecosystems.
So one thing I'll add is coming from a geologic perspective, when we write in papers and proposals about climate change, it means that there's some force, as she said, to the system. So like you wake up in the morning and you have some mood changes or whatever, that's inside of you. So we call that natural climate variability. Climate change is when something from the outside comes in and adds energy to the system to change things around, puts it out of whack. So that energy coming in is providing the change, which is outside of just the natural variability of things. So the change kind of implies the out of whack. But again, it's with respect to the climate system, it's outside the climate system. And so it's not just how it goes from day to day as you and I wake up and go to work and everything. Like you're driving and someone cuts you off and you get angry and you give them the what for. Then now you have a cause for a change in your attitude. So something from the outside is affecting. And so over the course of geologic timescales, there's changes in the Earth's orbit. There's changes in greenhouse gases. All these things are natural. Right now, a lot of it is due to humans and the way in which our producing our energy is sending up a bunch of stuff to the atmosphere that's trapping a lot of heat, given a lot of these consequences in terms of temperature increases. It's the greenhouse effect, like you in a greenhouse is hot because you kind of cap it with the physical greenhouse, which leads to sea level rise because you're heating the ice sheets. And so all these are changes outside of the natural variability. And I think that's the key that to take home there.
I think also the rate of change on geologic timescales is just unprecedented.
That's one of our biggest indicators that it's humans, because it's like someone plays football and they run the 40-yard dash in 4.4 seconds. Okay, you're going to the NFL. If someone runs a 40-yard dash in 0.04 seconds, you're a Marvel superhero, right? That's way too fast. And so right now, what's happening is on the equivalent of someone running the 40 in 0.04 seconds. It's like, whoa, it's not natural, right? So it's a clear indicator. Good call.
Jed, I also want to ask you about your specific research on reconstructing past climate changes. What does it mean to build a reconstruction, and why is it important to look at past climate change in order to understand modern day and future?
Great question. It leads exactly what we were saying. So changes in the Earth's orbit, there's the tilt that gives us the seasons. There's how eccentric or circular the orbit is. These things add up slowly over tens to hundreds of thousands of years and cause ice ages. And so it's how much sunlight comes in, is how much energy is in the system. These slow changes make ice sheets, melt ice sheets. These things happen naturally. And so we want to know how the Earth's climate responds to these natural things. And these are all forcings. And in the end, a forcing is just a forcing. It doesn't matter, if you get hit by something really small going really fast or something really big going really slow, like mass times velocity gives you a force. In this case, the rate is super fast. We know what's going on. It's greenhouse gases. And so we're studying past times, running climate models, simulations to see how the Earth responds there, to hopefully give us some indication about what we can expect in the future. Because all the models say the Earth is going to warm. That's a no-brainer. To quibble with that is, you're on the fringe. The question is, how is precipitation going to respond? How is El Nino going to respond? How are these different ocean currents going to respond? And all the models are slightly, the word is biased, but in this case it's not a bad bias. It's just how the thing is set up and parameterized to handle that. And so they give slightly different answers. And so if you're in the American Southwest or here in Texas, very key location between the Gulf of Mexico and the Pacific, some models say, oh, right at I-35 there's a precipitation, a rainfall gradient. Over here it gets wet, over here it gets dry, and some people move it around a few hundred kilometers. For a climate model, a few hundred kilometers is no big deal. But if you live on that gradient, that's a huge deal, right? And so trying to narrow down that uncertainty. We're using a lot of geologic data to help do that.
Okay, and then Misha, I also want to ask you about your research. You're studying how reef-building corals adapt to environmental changes. Can you tell me about how climate change has impacted reef-building corals?
Well, yeah, there is no good news here. climate change and all the impacts of climate change, most notably heat waves, but also intensifying hurricanes, they destroy my corals just all over the place. And the end result of this could be just a diminishing of the reef building, which they declined over like 15% of all corals have died over the past decade. It doesn't sound like much, but some places suffer really much more than others. And the Caribbean, starting with our own coasts in Florida and a whole bunch of small Caribbean nations which rely on coral reefs for livelihood, right now everything's going to be changing because the Caribbean coral reefs are basically going extinct as we speak. Like in our observed, like my own lifetime, they went from beautiful coral gardens to just bare rock, and there is no way back. The exact causes of that are unclear, and we probably don't have to know why they died to do something, and so there's a very big big theme of debate and discussion in our coral community. Suddenly we were just studying adaptations, corals, genomes, all the fun stuff, going to the field work, looking at fun corals, and now it's suddenly becomes relevant, and we actually realize that we can and probably should do something. And the biggest problem that we're having with implementing any of those ideas are the environmental laws, which are totally set against any proactive measures. They are conservative and they're designed to keep things as they are. And it doesn't work anymore. Mm-hmm. Things as they are gone. Right. They're never coming back. What to do? Law is completely unprepared for this sort of situation. If we're talking about ecological restoration and proactive measures, I don't know, selective breeding, targeted introductions of species to like keep the ecosystem going. That's what we're talking about, and that's a completely no-no from the current regulation standpoint. Our biggest problem right now. Yeah.
Melinda, or maybe someone else, do you want to speak on the climate change legislation and the effect that it has or doesn't have?
Yeah, and just first to Misha's point, because I think that's a really, really good point. And I have done some work on that issue, particularly in the context of endangered species and some of the problems with the Endangered Species Act and the way that conservation is to be achieved under that act is basically to protect habitat where it exists today. And we know, I mean, that just doesn't make sense for most species. We've got to figure out a mechanism to protect habitat along a gradient, right? And anticipate where the habitat will be suitable for that species 10 years, 15 years, 30 years from now. And the act is just not set up that way. So I could not agree more that our existing laws and regulations are quite rigid, and they were written and designed in a different time when the goals were to stop pollution, stop development that was detrimental to the environment. Now we find ourselves in a world where we need to be able to plan for the future, quickly permit things like renewable energy facilities and new electricity transmission, things like that. And our system is not very well equipped to do that. You're going back to your other question, though, Medha. I am optimistic in some respects. The Biden administration passed a really significant law a couple of years ago called the Inflation Reduction Act that is by far the most significant piece of legislation the United States has ever passed to attempt to address climate change. Most of the law is really written around incentives, providing incentives to everybody from a homeowner to better insulate their home or install more solar panels or buy an electric vehicle, to car manufacturers to encourage the production of electric vehicles. But then there is a very important provision that addresses the release of methane emissions from oil and gas wells and pipelines, so the upstream and midstream of the oil and gas industry. And I work closely with the oil and gas industry on reducing methane measures, and I'm seeing how those regulations are influencing the operations of those operators. So while we have a lot of work to do in order to kind of modernize our environmental laws and regulations, I do feel like we've made some progress, particularly in the last couple of years, in trying to move things forward.
Okay. Helen or Judd, do you have any thoughts on, the legislation and how it's maybe affecting your own research? Or
one thing I'll add for the Inflation Reduction Act was there's also a provision for providing billions of dollars for capping what we call abandoned or orphaned wells. And so these are wells that are also leaking methane and other greenhouse gases, in addition to serving as sort of a conduit of flow for groundwater, which is water that's held in pore spaces in the rock, to migrate between aquifers. And so that's a big contamination issue. And so that money is going a long way towards mitigating the impact that these orphaned and abandoned wells have. But we have hundreds of millions of abandoned and orphaned wells across the United States, and we haven't mapped them all. We don't know where all of them are. So like, it's a huge step forward, but there's more work that needs to get done.
I didn't know they existed.
There's so many.
Today I learned.
It's the goal.
I will give my opposite opinion. I'm quite pessimistic on the legislation because it's just, we call it a hot mess. So like, if you look at the carbon budget and where the big impacts are to reduce carbon emissions. So carbon, CO2, methane are the big major players in the atmosphere. Some other ones, NO2 and 2O, that are absorbing the heat and keeping it on the planet. So what we want to do is try and get rid of some of these molecules that are trapping the heat. CO2 and methane are the two biggest players in the room. If you look at the carbon budget, there's things like land use changes that dwarf changes due to aviation, and people are like, oh, if you fly less, you hate the earth or something. It's like land use changes are huge. So then they introduce legislation to the farmer saying, hey, if you do these farming practices, then we'll give you credits and some exchange system. And the farmers are like, oh yeah, I'd love to do it. It's going to help me with my farming. It's going to make my land more fertile and everything. And there's these huge studies that it's a hot mess. They try to get the subsidies and the credits, and they can't because the legislation is so complicated and convoluted. That's one example. Another one would be like office buildings and cement. Cement is a huge CO2 emitter when cement is made. You don't hear anything about it. It dwarfs the airline industry, and it's like, I mean, I'm not saying oil and gas they should be addressed, but there's these huge major players that are flying under the radar as everyone, gets, these other things get screened, and the legislation focuses on them. They just, while the cat's away, the mice will play. And so there's very large sources of CO2, and I don't see any, public talk. I mean, it's...
There's a lot of research going on, especially on the production of cement to lower the carbon emissions associated with cement
but there's
production.
That's active research, not
yeah,
legislation, right?
Well, but you gotta, it takes time. I mean, and it's not gonna, we can't do things as quickly as we would all love to have those things done, but I mean, honestly, methane emissions from oil and gas, from that industry, it's the largest anthropogenic source of methane emissions in the United States. So it's a big deal that we've,
I'm not trying to minimize
kind of on the road. Yeah, but I just think, given how long it's taken us to get to that point, if we can actually demonstrate some progress, it will have, in my view, it will have a sort of cascading effect. It'll encourage policymakers to look at other sectors. If for nothing else, just funding research on new and better and less polluting ways to make these other products. So,
absolutely, that's definitely a win-win for everyone.
Yeah. But you're right. I mean, there's huge parts of our economy and the global economy that we have not really figured out.
Even talked about, or even,
I think we're talking about it.
Why is it, if I want to, so people say, first off, you want to electrify a vehicle and that saves the planet. So then I've had a plug-in hybrid since 2014. I can say the number of new vehicles on the road are about this much. The number of new chargers are about this much.
Right.
So everyone's trading in their EVs now. The prices plummeted if you've used EVs, or people are losing, they're underwater in their car loans and all this stuff because they put the cart before the horse because there's no legislation to say, we need to build infrastructure first.
Well, there actually is. Both the Infrastructure Bill and the Inflation Reduction Act have provisions to build more chargers. But again, it takes time.
Provisions, but
And money. I mean, it's only been 2 years. So anyway, it's not going to be perfect. I mean, but there's no way to design something where it's just a seamless rollout, I don't think. Anyway.
I agree.
I'm an optimist.
Well, thank you all for this very insightful first section of our panel and for that back and forth. We're actually going to cut to commercial break now. After the break, I'll look into how the government oversees climate change related efforts. Towers will be back.
My daughters what to do with their bodies.
This state is one of the worst in child education.
We can't take it anymore seeing those scenes.
Going to Hillel on Friday night, all my family members kept texting me not to go.
There's a huge housing crisis in Austin. Do you have a plan in place to address this issue? Determined to start your day well? We're up bright and early. From the enriching local stories to the weather forecast later in the day. Rain or shine, at Good Morning Longhorns, we got you covered. Comprised of a studious reporting staff going lengths to get that scoop, and a talented technical team to enhance your screen visually. As a fellow Longhorn, your mornings are better with us. So start your day the Vivo way. Good Morning Longhorns, Wednesdays at 7 a.m. Central Time on TSTV.
Of the 48 club sports offered by the university now require students to submit proof of sex assigned at birth.
I know deep down they would probably want to stay with the university.
No way.
Welcome back to Tower Talks. We recently discussed the impact of our panelists' research and projects. However, government initiatives could both help or hinder the research in these fields. Helen, I want to come to you first. Can you tell me how climate change affects marginalized communities more than other communities? I know we talked about that earlier, but can you dive into that? And what can local institutions do to better support these communities?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, as I said previously too, it's just there's less buffer room available for people to adapt when you're in some of these marginalized populations, because there's just a long history of, redlining in Austin is a really great example of that. So communities in East Austin were placed there by the 1928 Grand Plan, Austin's Grand Plan, and the zoning laws allowed for them to be located really close to industrial activities, oil and gas storage. There's the famous tank farms in East Austin, an airport in Springdale, and there was a long history of just environmental injustice in that area. And so one of the things is there's just so many other things stacked up against some of these communities that you add in extra flooding from climate change, you add in longer droughts, more expensive water, more expensive electricity, and it's just an additive effect. And so one of the things that we are doing with Project Cressel is we're really interested in working with these communities to develop resilience plans that work for them. Because one of the things about climate resilience is it looks different for every community that you work with. So one solution is not going to be successful across the board. And so involving these communities in a discussion with what is climate resilience to you, what do you need, I think is really important. So one of the things that I think institutions like Watershed Protection is doing this in Austin right now, we're doing it here at UT, is just have conversations about resilience. And those conversations go back and forth. So it's scientists informing the public about their research and what they're doing, but it's also communities informing scientists and policymakers about what they think resilience is and what's important to them. So I think that goes a long way. But again, funding is always great.
How successful do you think these initiatives have been so far? in helping these communities?
That's a great question. I think we're starting on the right path with some of these conversations. And I think that just general awareness about climate change has increased. And so that helps a lot with these communities. They sort of have more of the vocab about like what climate change is and what climate change impacts in their communities might look like. But I think there's a long way to go towards actionable change. And so some of the things that we're dealing with in East Austin are like flooding. And so a lot of these communities with big flash floods will flood, and then there's a disruption in their ability to access services. So you've not only got food deserts, but you've also got people who are being flooded out and can't access food or the hospitals and things like that. And that's just, part of that is just big infrastructure projects. Building cities for the future and planning for, I think, population shifts across the United States is going to be really important, because what you're going to see with climate change is a lot of what people are now calling climate migrants. And so people, leaving after Hurricane Helene or leaving after Hurricane Milton or forest fires or something, people are going to be moving around. And so it's really important, especially for these communities that might not have the ability to escape some of these big climate disasters that we're seeing, to not only build up that resilience, but also plan for the future to sort of lessen that burden too.
I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads from the others. Do you guys have thoughts that you want to share on this?
Yeah, I will say that in the environmental law area over the last couple of decades, there's been a much higher awareness of the issue of environmental justice generally, and how disadvantaged communities tend to suffer from things like water pollution or proximity to sources of toxic emissions, as Helen was saying, with being situated near a tank farm or something where they're breathing in fumes of benzene and other chemicals. So I think it's very, very important, the work that she and her colleagues are doing to try to build that awareness, but look at it through the climate lens, because that's, as we go forward, there's some unique issues and challenges that are posed by climate change, but it certainly makes sense.
Yeah. Also, like speaking about environmental justice and communities, looking broader at the global scale, the fundamental injustice that the climate change is made by big nations, but it's small nations which are the most affected. So in my coral world, which hinges on the proper development of coral reefs for like people's livelihoods and food and tourism and shore protection and everything, basically without coral reefs, these nations cannot survive. And that's probably like almost a poster child, except it's a negative, should be negative poster child, like a bad example of how this whole situation is not very justicey overall. We have ethical responsibility to try to fix it for them somehow. Yeah.
And with that, we'll finish off the second section of our panel.
It's good I didn't say anything, because I'm a pessimist.
I'm
an optimist at heart, but I just see so little change that it's just like business as usual, just keeps going. And a lot of it, so in order for so first off, we have to agree there's a problem. If everyone agrees there's a problem, then we have to go for solutions. And so then we have to say, what are the solutions? And right now the solutions are just not meeting the problem, because most of the solutions, you almost have to go out of your way in order to implement the solutions. They're just not easy. They're not for everyone to do. For example, I have solar panels and a power wall from a company, it rhymes with Flesla, at home, right? So we had a hurricane, it went out, there's issues with the battery backup. They had to bring a gas generator to jumpstart it. And I'm on the phone with tech support and everything, but I'm savvy enough to be able to deal with it. So it's like, obviously the solutions aren't there, even for me as a savvy user, to start to do this stuff. And I think a lot of it is due to the fact that we haven't all agreed that we need to make the change and actually push the market. Because I'm a capitalist, I like capitalism. But if you ask 100 CEOs, would you rather have a 1/4 loss and a 10-year gain, or a 1/4 gain and a 10-year loss? They'll take the short-term gain. Then you say, okay, well, you can have this gain if you, happen to cut some corners here with regulating your gases or your effluents or whatever, pollutants, and they'll be like, oh, yeah, do it, no problem. Us as humans, if we did that personally, it would be like almost an assault, but with the veil of a corporation and business and, oh, you're hindering growth, you're hindering this. So there has to be some change to how people start to do business and think not just about the bottom dollar, which is important, and I'm not saying to kill the bottom dollar, but also the fact that we're humans on a planet living together and make choices with that in mind.
But that's not capitalism, dude. That's socialism.
I'm not saying that. If there's a couple regulations, regulations is about the only way to do that, right? No one's going to willfully cut their bottom line to save other people unless it's, a person-to-person basis. And so the veil of a business. And I'm not saying to kill capitalism. But you don't need, why do you need 8% growth, 7% growth, or 6%, and if you have to spend a little bit more to clean up, then the children are going to have a better planet. The people who are getting injustice are going to be living a little bit better, you know what I mean? And so
it's just longer-term investment, you're saying?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, frame it like this. It's actually pretty attractive.
But you have to make it easy for people to make everyday choices that help the long-term investment, such that I don't have to go out of my way and get the Monterey Bay Aquarium card on which food to eat. Like,
well, what's the alternative to that?
You can have an app for you.
Regulation.
Right, there's an app for that. But then if you put the onus on people to do all this extra work at every point in their life, when I go to get seafood, which gas do I buy, which company is this, which company, it gets overwhelming. And so that's where the government needs to step in. Or enough people are educated to know that this is the bad choice, right? And so that's where education, you tell the public, we're out here, we're talking to you, we're saying, hey, it's an issue, hey, you need to make choices that are going to help with solutions. And if everyone starts doing that and votes with their dollar, capitalism-wise, then the winner will be the one who gets the most dollars. And it's going to be voted on by people who buy the right products. But you got to make those products easy to get.
That sounds like a nice political agenda. You should run for one of those.
Dude, I never get voted in office. Are you kidding me? No, but so I just don't see that happening yet. I don't see the legislation going in that way. I don't see the public discourse going in that way yet. I have hope that it'll happen, but right now we're like in the infancy. But we need to act fast because we're already at like 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming.
And rising.
Accelerating.
Yeah, accelerating more.
Yeah, which is like even more worser. And so that's the origin of my pessimism. I'll shut up now, sorry.
No, sorry. No, you're fine. A range of pessimism to optimism on our panel, but we're closing out section 2 and we will come back in section 3 to talk about climate change denial. After the break, we'll be talking about climate change, misinformation, and disinformation. Towers will be back.
In hell, anybody's going to tell my daughters what to do with their bodies.
This state is one of the worst in child education.
We can't take it anymore seeing those scenes.
Going to Hillel on Friday night, all my family members kept texting me not to go.
There's a huge housing crisis in Austin. Do you have a plan in place to address this issue? Determined to start your day well? We're up bright and early. From the enriching local stories to the weather forecast later in the day. Rain or shine, at Good Morning Longhorns, we got you covered. Comprised of a studious reporting staff going lengths to get that scoop, and a talented technical team to enhance your screen visually. As a fellow Longhorn, your mornings are better with us. So start your day the Vivo way. Good Morning Longhorns, Wednesdays at 7 a.m. Central Time on TSTV.
13 of the 48 club sports offered by the university now require students to submit proof of sex assigned at birth.
I know deep down they would probably want to stay with the university.
No way in hell anybody's going to tell my daughters what to do.
Welcome back to Tower Talks. As we come to a close on this panel, I have a few final questions for everyone about climate change denial. For decades, as evidence of climate change has grown, many Americans still believe there's no evidence. For example, a 2023 Pew Research poll found that 14% of Americans say there's no solid evidence that the Earth's temperature is getting warmer. So I'm curious how this belief, this denial, shows up in your classrooms for our professors on the panel, in your research, in the communities that you're talking to. What reasons are people citing for not believing climate change, and how do you navigate those conversations? This is an open question for everyone. Would you like to start?
Since
Yeah, go
I'm
forward.
sitting right here next to you. So, yeah, people used to say that there are 3 stages of denying climate change, and we're probably on the 3rd one right now. The first one is, oh, climate change isn't happening. Right now, it looks like 86% of people actually seeing what's happening around them, and they accept that climate change is happening. The second phase, climate change is happening, but it's all natural. It's just like Earth precession, the orbit, schmorbit, your stuff. Turns out, yeah, no, it's not humans, basically. But yeah, it actually is, because if you take humans out of the model, the planet should be cooling, as far as I know. And now the 3rd stage is what we're entering right now, is that climate change is happening and humans are to blame, but it's too late to do anything. It's hopeless. So let's just live our lives as much as we can. So it's a problem that mostly because whether we believe or not believe in climate change is not part of your personal choice, but actually ingrained in the community, in the group of people you're collaborating and basically dealing with every day. If you're a conservative business owner going to play golf with conservative business owners, and suddenly you say like, oh, climate change is a problem, you'll be thrown out of the golf club. You don't want that. Being thrown out of the tribe is the primeval fear that we all humans have from back in the caveman times, which was really scary, because if you're thrown out of the tribe, you're dead by morning. And right now we're all too afraid to accept that something which our community believes in, like rules of our community, is actually not true, because then you are not part of the community, not part of the tribe. The tribalism, which is evolutionary carryover, which is something holds us back right now a lot. Yeah.
Said the biologist.
Yeah, so people do know, they're all educated, they all know the facts. They've been a lot of informatics, and everybody knows, everybody heard all the arguments. Some people just willfully choose to ignore it, because that's their rules.
We're in that time.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Helen. Okay, I was just going to say, I think one of the most, well, first of all, the question as you posed it, Medha, I think is a reflection of an education problem. I think in the United States, there is a pretty broad range in terms of, people that receive a very good, solid public or private school education, and those who unfortunately are not in a position to do that. And I think the public opinion polling reflects that as much as anything. The people that don't believe in it, unfortunately, are people who may not have learned as much about it in school. But the second piece is, climate change, like a lot of other environmental issues, has become so politically polarized, and that was not always the case. When I got out of law school 30 some odd years ago and practiced environmental law, worked in Washington, D.C., did a lot of lobbying, you didn't just go talk to the members of Congress of a particular party when you were trying to get a bill passed that dealt with the environment. You found a member or a senator who might care about that issue because his or her constituents cared about the issue. And political party was really secondary. And so I think that's one of the most unfortunate aspects of the modern time that we're living in, is that it's become a, as Misha said, sort of a tribal thing or a political thing. If you affiliate with one party, you're much more likely to diminish or denigrate the importance of climate change, and that really prevents us from getting around a table and figuring out what solutions make sense, what's logical, what can be done. So anyway.
No, yeah, I was going to just add that I think, like, in addition to this lack of maybe education or knowing about it, I think people are starting to get the right vocabulary, like sort of understand what it is. But I think the disconnect there is people don't understand how it impacts their lives. So getting that understanding of like, oh no, all of these major storms that I'm seeing, all of these droughts, all of these maybe increased prices of groceries at the grocery store have some root in climate change that, yeah.
Everybody will be impacted. It doesn't matter how much money you make. Yeah. It's everyone's problem.
Part of the issue is certain people have tried to make it like the world's going to end in 12 years and, the world's going to end, or this catastrophic sort of story, when the truth is not a catastrophic story. But there's going to be a huge price tag to pay. And always the people who, get relegated to some poor part of town are going to pay a big price, especially compared to how much they bring in life. The people who have tons of money are going to skate by and, be able to circumnavigate. I mean, a bazillion movies about all this kind of stuff. But when I talk to people and they deny it, I'm like, well, I always ask, like, what part do you not understand? Do you not know? And it's like, the temperature's going up. And there's still people out there like, oh, this thermometer was in the sun or something. And so, the urban heat island effect, or all sorts of, arguments to try to say it's not warming. It's concluded that it's warming. So now they kind of move the goalpost to it's a lukewarmer. We can only expect just a little bit of warming. And CO2 is good for plants, and we don't need to worry. But that sort of feet dragging is just going to make the problem worse down the road. We're going to have a bigger price to pay. And the older people really don't care because, their life is short expectancy. The kids are going to deal with it the most. People our age are right in the middle. And so you have to connect with people and say, hey, what are the effects in your community? What are the effects with the children? And I can tell you, being someone who studies natural cycle, there is no natural cycle to explain it. Because if there was, I would write a paper. I would be world famous. I would be a bazillionaire. I'd have a Nobel Prize. But I can't write the paper to say it's a natural cycle. My job is to study them, whichever camera. I can't write that paper because no natural cycle explains what's going on right now. The only thing that explains it is humans. Human activity, and the science is clear. It's been known for 130 years. And so trying to say that in not big scientific jargon, but break it down to people, I have found like 99 times out of 100, if I don't use big words and just talk to people and answer their questions about what their honest questions are, they all come around and like, wow, it is a problem. Oh, wow, it's not a natural cycle. Oh, but every person comes from a different part of life. And so we really need to do better as science communicators to make sure not to talk over people, not to cut them down, not to degrade them, not to shame them from using a straw or flying or some stupid stuff like that, right? And so we need to not talk down to people, not talk over them. We need to talk to them and communicate what the real issues are. And don't try to sound all smart and uppity and use big words either, right? Because, like, not everyone has the same educational background, like she just said. And so, like, that's the biggest problem with the misinformation and denial that I see. Because everyone I've talked to that's a denier, except for a select few, they're like, oh, wow, we do need to do something. And it's like, yeah, now you have the facts and you're equipped to make the decision.
We're lucky.
Optimism.
Finally, I just have one last question for all of you before we close out the panel tonight. What is one key takeaway that you want people to remember, realize about climate change? What is one main thing? How about we start with you, Melinda, and come down this way?
That's a great question, and I guess it would be sort of a three-part answer. First, climate change is quite serious. It's affecting the globe in all sorts of ways, as we've been discussing tonight. It's imperative that we take it seriously. Second thing, though, I think, is that there is a tremendous amount of research, technological breakthroughs, policy breakthroughs in the last several years that tell me, at least, that we can make some progress. It's going to be slow. It's not going to be as efficient as we all wish it could be, but we are and can do more. We're making progress and can do even more. And then third, it's just imperative that we not stop and get off that path and sort of become cynical and convinced that we can't do anything about it, because we can. We can't save every animal or plant that's going to be lost as a result of climate change, but we can save a lot. And I just think we owe it to our children, grandchildren, and to our people around the globe, basically, to keep trying.
Yeah, and I think I would just add, the only other thing is just that it doesn't have to be this big detrimental, occurrence. It can be an opportunity. It can be something that really drives innovation and change and a more just and equitable society. Like if we can really come together on this and make lasting change, like it can be sort of this big pivotal moment.
Since we're talking to the students, I'll say, you were done? Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. I heard you go down. Just want to make sure I didn't cut you off. Two things to the students. One, who you vote for will impact the legislation that's coming through the pipeline. So one, get out there and vote as a young person. Every vote counts. Don't let anyone tell you your vote doesn't count. They're wrong. Number two, this is a huge opportunity for some people to find these niches for solutions that are easy to implement for billions of people. And if everyone has to do that solution, guess what? You will be the next billionaire. So I would say to anyone out there who's studying these things in school, dude, you will be like a top 10 billionaire if you come up with some of these easier solutions, easy to implement, that everyone can do, that will make a big change. The tech just doesn't exist yet, a lot of this stuff. Some does. Some renewable energy solutions do exist. They're going to get better. Right now, they're really in their infancy. But there's some stuff that no one's ever thought of, that some smart kids out there could whiz it up and be like, phew. And it's not going to destroy the global economy. That's a red herring. Netflix didn't destroy Blockbuster. Blockbuster chose to stick with discs and said, people want to walk down the aisle and pick up stuff and look at it, and that's how they're going to rent a movie. No one's just going to click and download and not leave their home and stream a movie. Like, good call, right? And so, like, that didn't kill Blockbuster. They killed themselves by not adapting. And a new technology came in, like Netflix changed it, and now it's, a mega stock, and people are making bazillions, right? It's a good thing. So there's a capitalistic answer to young people out there to do it.
I'd like to mildly disagree with Judd here, who emphasizes that the new technologies will be the savior. I think there is enough technologies right now to do great things to mitigate the climate problem, to start doing. Our biggest problem right now is not lack of means to combat climate change. It's our mindsets which are preventing people from making good decisions on this matter. This is the frustrating part for me. It's like, yes, we can do things, just let us. Just let's decide that we are going to do something about this. Let's all decide about it. So, especially if you are in a group or a party or a tribe which doesn't believe in climate change, just ask yourself, you're denying climate because it's your personal intellectual choice, or you're just following this group of people. Is it really a good decision? Just check yourself on this. Maybe it's time when we need to kind of go beyond the political part of it.
I will agree. Daily actions add up to big changes. But it's not just on the onus of every person to change their daily lives, as well as the industry, as well as the government. Everything's going to add up to the solution.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming out tonight to talk on this panel. That's it for our discussion today. Thank you for informing us more about climate change and green initiatives. Tune in next week to hear from experts about free speech on campus. Be sure to follow us on social media at TSTV News on X, formerly Twitter, and at Tower Talks TSTV on Instagram. Check us out at tstv.news online and subscribe to our newsletter, Newsroom Notes. From all of us here in the studio, thank you for joining us this evening, and good night.